The early 90s were the heyday of so-called demos, audiovisual presentations designed to push the limits of PC hardware. A young Swedish programmer named Andreas Axelsson joined the demo group The Silence at the insistence of a friend. While The Silence were a top-notch group, Axelsson found that the demo scene really wasn't for him and began his own side project with a few members. This project wouldn't merely be a presentation, but a full-on video game, a pinball simulator that they called Pinball Dreams. But as the guys worked on it, they realized that it was actually turning out much better than they'd thought. The project was going so well, in fact, that they realized they could sell it.
Originally, it wasn't even intended to be a commercial product, but as it turned out, it became a product and the company was founded.
And so the guys, who were still university students, decided late one night to make their own company called Digital Illusions Creative Entertainment, or DICE. They figured if it didn't work, it was no sweat off their backs. They hadn't even graduated yet.
It started from something fun, and in the end it became kind of reality.
20 years, dozens of games, and one killer franchise later, the guys at DICE have performed so well on the battlefield that they're about to earn a Medal of Honor. When Pinball Dreams released in 1992, they weren't sure what the reception would be. To their own surprise, it was a smash. No other pinball game of the day had the same level of realism and is to this day considered one of the best pinball sims ever made. Following it up with a sequel was a no-brainer, and they finished off Pinball Fantasy so fast that they released it in the same year, 1992. They gave themselves a bit more breathing room with the third game, Pinball Illusions, which didn't release until 1994. Collectively, these games are referred to as the Pinball Trilogy, which still has a core fan base today. With the conclusion of the trilogy and the great sales the games had generated, DICE knew that they were now a legit company. They figured it was high time to move the business out of their apartments and actually get an office. And after they settled into their new place in Gothenburg, Sweden, they decided to make a more hardcore game. The team went for a futuristic arcade racer with realistic physics, a trait that had helped make their pinball games such a success. Their work was noticed, and before the title was even released, Swedish carmaker Volvo hired them to make a simple promotional product for their upcoming S40 car. Since DICE would just be using the game engine they'd already built for their arcade racer, and the product would only feature the S40 alone on 2 tracks, the whole thing took just 45 days from start to finish. The result was shown off at major car exhibitions around the world in 1997. A year later, the futuristic racing game was released as Motorhead, which went on to sell over 1 million units internationally. DICE was more than just a startup now. Rolling along nicely, DICE found a partner in crime in another Sweden-based developer, Refraction Studios. Refraction had just completed work on the action game codenamed Eagle, which had become a cult hit. The two studios merged in 2000, though the Refraction name was dropped and the whole entity took on the Digital Illusions brand. The former Refraction studio already had a game in the works, and most of the company got behind it, an ambitious, team and class-based World War II shooter, Battlefield 1942.
I would say that already the founders of Refraction Games had a vision of, they were still at school when they did as their final kind of exam 3D engine, which later became the Refractor engine. And they had a vision about this game where soldiers, vehicles, planes, everything would fight together on the online battlefield. And that's kind of what was the original foundation for Codename Eagle.
But that game was still a few years away from being done. In the meantime, DICE had made some more racing games, like 2000's NASCAR Heat, and also some cheap but lucrative movie tie-ins, such as the official Shrek game in 2001. Rising fast with no end in sight, they acquired the Canadian developer Sandbox Studios in 2001 and rebranded them as DICE Canada. The little company started by university students was now a multinational corporation. And then in 2002, Battlefield 1942 stormed the beaches of an unsuspecting gaming world.
For DICE as a company, at the point where they shifted from racing games to first-person shooters, was basically the acquisition of Refraction Games. The company needed or felt that it was the right time to grow.
While nothing in it was wildly new, it hit the perfect balance between fun and challenging, realistic and stylized, accessible and hardcore. It had some of the best vehicle mechanics ever seen in a game, and those vehicles were on land, sea, and air. The classes players could choose from were varied and balanced, making every matchup wildly different. And it didn't hurt that, with the success of the Medal of Honor series, World War II shooters were in fashion. But where Medal of Honor was a great single-player experience, Battlefield was one of the greatest multiplayer shooters ever made. In one single game, a player could commandeer a tank, fly a heavy bomber, assault an entrenched position, then hang back and heal his teammates before rushing off to do something else entirely. All this with almost no learning curve, in huge maps with endless opportunities.
Had we known what we had ahead of us, we probably would have started making that game. So it was quite a challenge. It was, I wouldn't say a death march, but it was the toughest project I've been on. But we pushed through, and we really felt that we had something coming. We knew that it worked in Codename Eagle, so we saw the potential for the future. So for a small Swedish studio, it was a kind of impressive undertaking that we finally managed to get through all the way.
Technically, the game was faulted for having a weak campaign, but everyone was too busy having fun online to notice. As if all that wasn't enough, DICE made the game modder-friendly, and it wasn't long before the internet was flooded with variations on the stellar core experience. The game was a breakout success and launched the Swedish studio into the upper echelons of game developers.
We tried to pitch this game for every publisher in the world, and in the end we had to find our own agent in North America, go around, and it wasn't until EAD at that time, EAP nowadays, at Electronic Arts in San Francisco, saw the game and Codename Eagle. And in that way felt that there might be something here. And they finally signed a deal, and we were ready to go.
Battlefield 1942 became one of the least expected and most loved hits of the year.
The first press event when we were about to release the game, and we showed it on USS Hornet at Alameda, San Francisco, the big carrier, so 64 computers in a LAN network on the deck, which was an amazing thing to experience, and you could really feel that success was in the air. And after all that work, it was amazing.
The Pinball Wizards were now some of the most elite forces in the world, and it wasn't long before they announced that they'd be deploying to Vietnam. Tune in next time to see DICE advance from history to the far future. When a handful of university students in Sweden decided to make a game, they didn't really know what would come of it. But after Pinball Dreams turned into a surprise commercial success, they decided to turn their little startup into a legit business. And so, Digital Illusions Creative Entertainment started to make hardcore racing games while acquiring a studio in Canada. But their biggest opportunity came when they merged with Refraction Games, another Swedish developer with a World War II game in the works. In 2002, that game invaded the world as Battlefield 1942, a sleeper mega hit that redefined multiplayer shooters. There was no question that Battlefield was about to become a flagship franchise for publisher Electronic Arts. And over the next few years, DICE would take Battlefield from the major conflicts of this century to the present and beyond. Immediately after 1942 was released, DICE went back to making racing games with 2003's Midtown Madness 3 and 2004's Rally Sport Challenge 2. However, everyone knew that another Battlefield game couldn't be far away. And indeed, in 2004, DICE acquired Trauma Studios, a group of modders who had made a popular mod for Battlefield 1942 called Desert Combat. Desert Combat took the 1942 engine and shot it to the modern day, recreating the Gulf War of the early 90s. It was a sign of things to come. But the next Battlefield game wouldn't be set in World War II or the modern day, and wouldn't even come from the Swedish developer. Rather, in 2004, Battlefield Vietnam would release from their earlier acquisition, DICE Canada. The Vietnam game was praised for improving on the first game's graphics, but was otherwise not as beloved as 1942. Despite crafting a 70s-era war game right down to the music choices, it just didn't take the franchise in any radical new direction. For the most part, people felt like it was a reskin version of 1942. While the game sold fine, it did not live up to the promise of its illustrious predecessor. Still, their publisher, Electronic Arts, had seen enough. In November of 2004, they publicly announced their intent to acquire DICE outright.
We've gained a lot of experience from each other throughout the years. For us, we were young and fresh, and we learned a lot. And at the same time, EA respected our honesty and learned a lot from how we made things. And then we've been going hand in hand.
It was a huge show of faith in the Swedish developer. And their faith was proven right with the release of Battlefield 2 in summer 2005. The fact that it was called Battlefield 2, despite being the third game in the franchise, said a lot about how Vietnam had been received. But this would be the first game in the franchise to be set in a fictional conflict, a two-front modern-day war between the United States, China, and the fictional Middle Eastern Coalition.
There were talks early about making a Modern Warfare game, but we were slightly doubtful at DICE that we could execute within the amount of time we had and do justice to that setting with everything that comes with it, heat-seeking missiles, jets, everything. So for some time there we were looking at Cold War era. We probably went through every little skirmish that's gone on planet Earth. But in the end, EA were quite constantly insisting on the Modern Warfare part.
In terms of gameplay, Battlefield 2 effectively dropped single-player entirely, instead making it the same as multiplayer in the same maps, but with bots. But for the multiplayer itself, they added a number of team-oriented features. Each team now had a commander, a single player who could view the entire map and call in artillery strikes or vehicle drops wherever he wanted. BF2 also included a squad system, in which any one team could further split up into squads. Hardcore teams could now operate in small groups working in concert, just like an actual military unit. All in all, the change in setting, improved team mechanics, and unbeatable balance between real and fun proved irresistible. Once again, the Swedish crew had crafted a masterpiece, and reviews and sales went through the roof. Also, by switching from World War II to the modern day, it set the trend that other shooter franchises would follow in the years to come. Battlefield was leading the way. But all wasn't well in DICE's world. Only a week after Battlefield 2 went gold, and only 9 months after they'd acquired the little company, DICE shut down Trauma Studios for undisclosed reasons. The modding crew behind Desert Combat would go on to found Chaos Studios on their own. Later that year, DICE released Battlefield 2 Modern Combat, a console version of their hit PC game. Despite the same name and setting, it was otherwise a different game altogether. Even though the PC version was one of the biggest hits of the year, the console version just couldn't keep the same buzz. With 2006 came the biggest change for the company since their merger with Refraction. On October 2nd, EA completed their acquisition of DICE.
So the transition to becoming EA on the outside and forums, community and so on, there were a lot of fears that DICE wouldn't be what DICE always been. But I think we've proven by now that, and EA proven its intention with the acquiring of DICE, that DICE isn't bought to be, to disappear into some grey mass. It's rather the new EA with separate studios that are credited for their great work and are allowed to continue to do it. So I would say that we're quite happy with the current status, and we get a lot of credibility and freedom to do what we do best.
However, there was one problem. DICE Canada was a direct competitor with some of EA's own Canadian studios. Sadly, DICE was forced to close it down. Only 2 weeks after the acquisition finished, the Swedish studio completed their march through time with Battlefield 2142. As a science fiction title, 2142 went all out with mech warriors and futuristic guns. But as with Battlefield Vietnam, solid reviews and a fine all-around experience couldn't make gamers shake the feeling that it was a retread of a better, earlier game. While the setting was dramatically different, the actual gameplay was very similar to Battlefield 2. Like the 70s era game, it sold fine, but wasn't a smash.
It's very easy to say, well, I don't like sci-fi. While, yes, it's a war game, it's a sci-fi war game. So we quickly noticed that a big part of the audience preferred the more historical or contemporary fights.
But after their journey to the future, DICE would come back to the modern era to completely reinvent their franchise and surprise the gaming world with a title no one saw coming. Tune in next time to see how DICE broke away from Battlefield to do something completely off the edge. After bursting onto the gaming scene with 1992's Pinball Dreams, developer Digital Illusions struck gold with their World War II shooter Battlefield 1942. With the success of the title, it was no surprise when DICE released a slew of games under the Battlefield banner. Their publisher, Electronic Arts, recognized their talent and acquired them outright in 2006. But immediately after the acquisition, DICE released Battlefield 2142, a futuristic sci-fi war game that didn't connect with audiences as well as earlier titles. Realizing that modern day was a more popular setting with gamers and with the financial backing of EA, they set out to make another modern combat game. But the Battlefield that resulted would be a huge and controversial break from what gamers had come to expect. And for all that, it was only a warm-up for one of the biggest gambles in DICE's history. When DICE decided to switch from 2142 back to the present day, they knew they wanted to push the boundaries of the Battlefield franchise. For one thing, while Battlefield was a dominant player in the multiplayer shooter space, they had never had a strong campaign. For another, despite their rabid fanbase on the PC side, their only console game had been a disappointment. So for the next Battlefield game, DICE launched an all-out assault on these unconquered portions of the gaming world. In 2006, they announced that their next game would feature a full narrative single-player and would be console exclusive. The campaign revolved around a misfit unit in the US Army that goes AWOL in the quest for stolen gold. It was told in the vein of a fun B-movie, with over-the-top action and a dark sense of humor.
I hope those are our guns. It's a beautiful sound either way. Listen out, boys! Typical! Drink your wine and sweets! It's about time we got some action!
Compared to anything else in the Battlefield library, it was by far the most in-depth and immersive campaign DICE had ever done. But the developer had one trick up their sleeve. For their new game, they'd be building a brand new engine from the ground up.
We've always been making our own engines, and sometimes we've kind of stepped back and questioned what we're doing, since it's costful, it's painful. I've been in on most of the Battlefield games where we build the engine and the game at the same time, and it's not really a recipe for success. Now I think as the company has matured, with the games we make, with the experience we built up through the years, it is an enormous asset and tool for us to be able to build games around. And in many of the things we do in the Battlefield games, we don't really see other engines doing out there.
Aside from allowing them to do whatever they wanted and make it look great, their new engine, named Frostbite, would showcase a mammoth change to Battlefield gameplay: fully destructible environments. Every game would now play out differently, and campers hiding in a building would no longer be safe. Destructible environments are relatively rare in gaming, and the feature would grow into one of the marketing buzzwords of the title. But by going console only, DICE faced a major backlash. Battlefield was a beloved title in the PC world, but those same PC gamers now felt betrayed. There was a sense in the community that PC consumers had built the Battlefield franchise, and now they were being abandoned. It was a lesson DICE wouldn't forget. But for console players, Battlefield Bad Company proved to be a fantastic title when it released in June 2008 after numerous delays. DICE had finally managed to port their addicting multiplayer experience to the TV screen, and its blend of vehicles, teamwork, and frantic combat ensnared the console world just as it had the PC. The addition of destructible environments was praised as far more than a marketing gimmick. It was a game-changing feature worth the price of admission alone. Sadly, DICE's much-touted campaign didn't meet with the same reaction. The goofy, humorous style didn't seem to fit with the seriousness of modern combat. While it was a good effort by the multiplayer developer, it just didn't stand up in the face of its more dramatic competition. However, DICE had one more game to release that year. First shown off at E3 2007, DICE would release Mirror's Edge in November 2008. From top to bottom, the game was a huge departure from what DICE, or indeed anybody else, had done before. The movements would be based on parkour, the color scheme would be stark and vibrant, the hero would barely use a gun. In a company and industry often accused of milking tired genres to death, EA used Mirror's Edge to highlight their originality and creativity.
We knew that, for every franchise there will be an end, and there's always so many things we want to try out in the company. So this felt like, yes, we are stepping outside of our comfort zone as a company. At the same time, we have something that we've been working with for a long time with prototypes. We do feel that we have something unique here. So a million things that the company and the team wanted to try out, and therefore it was kind of an extreme morale boost for the company and a lot of key learnings that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
The game took place in a totalitarian future where a resistance movement was fighting the government. The player would take the role of a runner, a group who used their free-running skills to navigate the environment and escape from their enemies. Specifically, the gamer would take on the role of Faith, a woman of Asian descent. Where nearly every single game has the player playing as a white male, once again, DICE was breaking from the norm. Faith only got a gun if she took one from a bad guy. Mirror's Edge was a shooter with almost no shooting. Because of that, EA knew this game would be a gamble. But in an uncharacteristically risky move, EA went all out with the title and released it in November. With the Christmas season right around the corner, November is usually reserved for the blockbuster mega hits of the year, usually sequels of established franchises in established genres. EA tried to pit Mirror's Edge against the odds, hopefully outselling the competition by its sheer inventiveness. It didn't work as well as they'd hoped. The game received only middling reviews. Critics faulted it for its linearity, its clunky combat mechanics, and its limited gameplay. Without strong buzz and against their competitors' biggest titles, Mirror's Edge wasn't able to break out. Contrary to popular belief, the game was not an outright flop. It sold over 1 million units by the end of the year. Still, compared to EA's normal holiday sales figures, that wasn't enough. Though the guys at DICE loved working on Mirror's Edge, it was obvious that they'd be returning to their flagship franchise. But when they did, gamers found that Battlefield would be taking a form they'd never expected. Tune in next time to see how Battlefield evolved into whole new markets. When video game developer DICE was founded, they made a variety of games from pinball to racers. But after the smash success of their multiplayer shooter Battlefield 1942, the company focused more and more on the Battlefield franchise. By the mid-2000s, every DICE game was from that series. So it came as a shock to the gaming world when they announced Mirror's Edge, a completely fresh approach to gameplay design and art direction. Sadly, despite a dedicated cult following, the game couldn't break out into mainstream success. It was clear that DICE and their owners, Electronic Arts, would be going back to the battlefield. And when it returned, the venerable series set out to conquer whole new territories with casual, downloadable, and hardcore titles, and finding success on all fronts. When Battlefield Bad Company was announced to be console exclusive, PC gamers felt like they'd been abandoned. But in January 2008, before Bad Company released, EA announced Battlefield Heroes, a PC-only Battlefield game that would come out in the same summer. Unfortunately, the game's release was pushed back repeatedly and it didn't arrive until June 2009, almost a year late. To say it was a dramatic departure for the series would be an understatement.
Battlefield heroes, fighting for the royalty. The nationals just want to win. The battle is to relax. Battlefield heroes.
It was a downloadable, cartoony, free game. That's right, it was absolutely free. It was designed to be simple, accessible, and addicting. Battlefield had entered the casual era. As with other successful casual titles, players only spent money if they wanted bonus items, like new costumes or weapons, which were completely optional. Gamers could also purchase items with points earned just by playing. So, if they played enough, they could get everything they wanted without paying a dime. The whole thing was part of EA's Play for Free initiative, their push into the casual gaming space. By pulling in one of their biggest assets, the Battlefield franchise, EA was showing how serious they were about getting casual. Despite the different art style and streamlined gameplay, the game appears to have been a success.
To be honest, it's one of those projects that you initiate and you know that this is going to be a long road of key learnings for the company. And that's what it's been. But I think they surpassed getting close to 5 million registered players is the word. So it is really a journey well worth embarking on. It is, as we see it, in many ways, the future.
Tellingly, however, they raised the price of most items after the game's release, and made it nearly impossible to buy good items only by playing. But DICE wasn't done changing up the formula yet. In July of 2009, only a month after Battlefield Heroes dropped, they released Battlefield 1943, a direct sequel to the game that started it all. While this was also a downloadable game, this time for Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network, 1943 was a thoroughbred hardcore title. Even though it only cost $15, DICE treated the project as though it were a full game. It ran on the same Frostbite engine as Bad Company, featured varied and balanced guns, and had land, sea, and air vehicles. Unlike other budget titles, which stripped out features to make it cheap, DICE threw in everything but the kitchen sink, but only on 4 maps. The belief was that hardcore gamers, usually shy of downloadable titles, would flock to this hardcore approach. They were right.
They didn't diminish the core experience of playing a Battlefield game. The mantra all the way through that project was that it's a slice of a full game. Yes, it doesn't come with 8 or 12 or 16 levels or 4 theaters, whatever it could be, but it's the experience when you get it and play it. It might as well have been a slice out of a AAA product that you buy in a box. And looking back, it really worked out.
When Battlefield 1943 released, it set both first-day and first-week sales records for downloadable titles. It received glowing praise for being the first budget title to be truly first-rate, and remains one of the most played games on Xbox Live. In the space of only 2 months, DICE had released 2 Battlefield games. A normal studio might consider taking a well-deserved break. DICE announced Battlefield Bad Company 2. Bad Company 2 would be a return to conventional game making, a huge, mega-budget title sold in stores at full price. But they still managed to put in a welcome surprise. Hardcore Battlefield was coming back to PCs. The title was being developed for Windows, the Xbox 360, and the PlayStation 3, making it the studio's biggest endeavor to date. The Frostbite engine and its destructible environments returned in full force, as well as another full campaign that continued the story of the first title. Listening to their critics, DICE toned down the humor a bit for the sequel. However, even reined in, it was still a fun B-movie story with misfit characters, this time on an epic quest to save America. It was widely praised as an improvement over the original game's storyline. But as always, the major seller was the multiplayer.
Okay, we got that charge in place. Stand by.
While it was in many ways the same old Battlefield experience, DICE had now refined it to perfection. When the game released in March 2010, there was cause for some concern. 2009's monster hit Modern Warfare 2 had swallowed its competition whole. Bad Company 2 was also a contemporary combat game. EA was betting that the Battlefield name was strong enough to compete against the juggernaut. And they were right. After receiving great reviews, Bad Company 2 released to sales beyond their expectations. EA finally had an answer to their rival Activision's Call of Duty brand. And then they announced that they had another answer. EA decided to resurrect their World War II franchise Medal of Honor as a modern-era game. More so even than Battlefield, this series was going to be a direct competitor to Call of Duty. EA would spare no expense, going all out to make the game as good as they could, and then market it with all their muscle. EA LA was tasked with making the campaign. But for the multiplayer, the publisher could think of no better studio than DICE. In a huge show of confidence in their Swedish branch, EA gave DICE full responsibility for Medal of Honor's multiplayer component.
We felt really honored to be asked to do the multiplayer component. The team's motivation here has very much been to find kind of a good middle way of what Medal of Honor, in their eyes, is, how the perception of the single-player component, but also base it on the experience that we built up through the years when it comes to first-person shooting in the Battlefield franchise.
Strangely, two different developers on one game also means two different engines. Unreal 3 for the campaign, and Frostbite for the multiplayer. DICE has promised that Medal of Honor will not be a Battlefield clone, with its greater emphasis on infantry combat and smaller maps. The game is set to release in October of 2010. Going forward, DICE will keep with their flagship Battlefield franchise as they also explore new games. Whether or not they will continue with Medal of Honor is currently unknown, but as one of EA's most prized studios, don't be surprised if they do. Also unclear is the fate of Mirror's Edge 2, since EA has publicly announced it, but DICE has repeatedly refused to confirm it.
There's always a lot of things flying around in the in the air, so that's not really something I can comment on at this point now.
However, with Bad Company 2 still selling strong and Battlefield 1943 still burning up the console charts, Digital Illusions Creative Entertainment now stands as one of the top developers in the world, respected by a dedicated following worldwide. All from a couple of university students with a pinball dream.